Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Women Leaders, the podcast that explains global events through discussions with women experts. And welcome to ELN, the European Leadership Network, the home of this podcast. I'm Ilana Beit-El. I'm a Senior Associate Fellow at ELN, and I'm your host for this conversation with women who are leading and shaping the world in many ways and fields. The war in the Gulf, the Middle East, and of course Iran is in its third week. Perhaps not unexpectedly, given that the war aims, at least the US war aims, were never very clear. But Iran is the heart of the matter, and it is understanding events there that we look to today. Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur, Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University, a senior fellow and researcher there, formerly the director of the center, and Maneli Mirkhan, strategist and founder of DORNA, an independent, non-affiliated organization that promotes the democratic transition in Iran, are here with me. And I couldn't think of two better women to talk to and try and understand better what it is that is happening in Iran and what is happening in the region, in fact. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. And as ever, let's start out finding out more about you. Maneli, perhaps you can tell us a bit about yourself and your career.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for having me. So Maneli, Franco-Persian, and I'm 45, mom of two, and I'm living in Paris. I left Iran when I was 13, and I did all my, studies and career based in Europe. I'm a strategist, meaning that I spent more than 20 years in business strategy, corporate strategy, and I'm graduated from French Petroleum School and nuclear industry, the Center of Nuclear Energy. So in my career, I had the opportunity 2 times to get projects in Iran and get to know what I'm dealing with, basically. So I spent time over 2 big projects actually during the GCPOA period inside Iran for European companies, basically dealing with what I know today as being the biggest problem, which is IRGC and their economic foundations.
IRGC, let's just be clear, that's the Republican Guards.
Yeah, the Revolutionary Guards. How did my involvement in the political side began basically 4 years ago, even though I've been always interested in geopolitics, and I was doing basically geopolitics. When you touch to oil, you touch to politics and geopolitics. But and non-proliferation of nuclear has always been part of my professional career also. But politically speaking, 4 years ago with the Mahsa Amini movement and Women Life Freedom movement, at beginning it was activism, it my face, willing to give a bit more sense to my life. So I got involved like this in many different areas, helping Iranian voice to be heard and having actions in France, and then it became more and more, I would say, organized, professionalized. I got involved with member of parliaments, with senators, and then I found it very disorganized. The whole, say, opposition side, helping to Iranians, were so much disorganized and non-existent, to be to be honest, that I told myself, yeah, the same thing, as I take it as a big mega project. So the same thing I would do for a big corporate, let's do it for Iranian people. So this is how I came up with Dorna. I will maybe explain more a little bit later on what we are doing, but yeah, it's basically.
Fabulous. Liora, you're based in Israel and you chose to specialize in Iran. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so thank you for the invitation, for having me. I'm Liora, and I'm a historian of modern and contemporary Iran. My work sits at the intersection of gender, media, and visual politics across both Pahlavi and Islamic Republic periods. I'm especially interested in how images and narratives shape legitimacy and national identity. Until 2023, I was the director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University, and today I am a senior research associate there. I'm also the author of Creating the Modern Iranian Woman, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2019, and it received the 2022 Latifa Yashater Book Award from the Association for Iranian Studies. I'm also currently working on a manuscript on the Pahlavis and the politics of representation around the last dynasty in Iran. And I'm also working currently on a project called In Her Words. It's a global interview project with women journalists about the pressures, risks, and breakthroughs that shape their work, especially in conflict and crisis. And I'm also a member of Forum Dvoa, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security in Israel. So I'm looking forward to the conversation that connects both sides of the issues that I usually focus on, whether it is the headlines and what they mean, and of course the historical background of the process and the conditions and circumstances, especially of Iran, of course.
Fabulous. Well, I think it can be beyond reasonable doubt that we have two incredibly well-qualified women to speak about the situation in Iran currently. And I would like to start from last time we spoke with the excellent Dina Esfandiari, and she told us a lot about what the context of the war was. This was 2 weeks ago, and of course we're now in week 3. But can I ask each of you, were you surprised by the war breaking out at the time it did, in the way it did? Liora, maybe you can take that one first.
Well, I can only reply from the standpoint of an Israeli and someone who follows the news consistently in that regard. And I can say that there was a huge buildup a month earlier to when the operation started. So in Israel, people were just waiting for it to start because every day they said maybe tomorrow, maybe this weekend, maybe a day after, maybe next week. So we were pressured in such a way that we were actually anticipating to the point that it reached a certain level of even a thought that maybe it will never happen. But there was a huge buildup. And of course, there was also a follow-up after the movement of U.S. military force to the region. So we knew that something might happen. And with everything that came to this region, especially towards the Persian Gulf, we knew that it's going to be something big.
On my side, said no surprise. I remember I was on a TV show in an interview, and during the negotiations just before the war. And my statement was that the war is inevitable. It's a matter of days. And I was seeing it as a continuation of what has begun already in the 12 Days War in June 2025. And the reason is that Iranians would never, the regime would never give up on the negotiations. We were seeing the same exact pattern that we had just before the 12 Days War, whereas again, the opportunity for negotiating has been done to the Iranian regime, and exact same responses, exact same pattern we're going through. Yeah, it was very predictable on the diplomatic side, and I was seeing also, even though Europeans were not aware of it, they were expecting it.
But when you say that you were expecting it, was it also a sense, though, that the Iranian people were expecting it? Or do you think that it was just the regime, or none of them were expecting it?
Well, war, generally speaking, I remember my first post on social media saying no to war with Iran at that time was around 15 years ago. So the context of a potential war has always been with us since more than a decade. This time, the context was different for Iranian people. After the massacre we had in January 8th and 9th, it was so widely asked to the international community to intervene. The word that we were using was not war, and people were not saying, let's do war, but in fact, asking for a military support, because I think for the first time, they widely recognized that there is no other option for Iranian people to be able to do something to bring change other than militarily weaken the regime. And that can only be done through military actions. Now, by saying that, again, you don't define war and you don't define at what extent and how, etc. But even some opponents who were always on the sides of reforms in Iran, etc., were talking about a military intervention. So it was expected within the society. But again, not the word war were used.
Is there a sense there now, because we're not seeing people on the streets, understandably, this is not, sort of why aren't they on the streets? What is the feeling amongst the people you are managing to talk to in Iran right now?
It's very, very difficult today in the society because the society were under shock after the massacre of more than 35,000 people. We are still in this space of not knowing what happened, and I think that the society will take time to realize what really happened. And then you put over it a sense of fear from bombings and a sense of hope and a sense of joy of some justice being made to those who are responsible for this massacre. So it's a melting pot, I think, of many, many different feelings, which somehow can paralyze the society, but also I feel it as lots of tension, which put them at a stage of we are very close. It can both be very productive at the moment where they are ready to go out, where they have space to go out, but it's also full of fear. When you have a society with that much tension, it can also bring some surprises then. And our aim, to be honest, at Dorna is to create conditions of a relatively stable transition. Transition is never stable by definition, but the relative stability comes from that fear of an exploding society, which is full of all these different elements and feelings.
Liora, when you look... Sorry, please, Liora, go.
I would like to add that I do agree that inside Iran, there are mixed emotions. And I think that the key thing to watch is how the state manages legitimacy under pressure. And in wartime, the system tries to do three things at once: project control, prevent fragmentation, at least at the elite level, and police public space. And that usually means tighter messaging, stronger security posture, and push to frame events in the language of serenity and national dignity. At the same time, Iranian society is not one audience. Some segments are tied to the state and security ecosystem and will echo the official framing, and many others, after years of economic strain and political repression, experience war as fear, exhaustion, and of course, it further narrows the civic space. So if to answer your questions, if they are in the streets or not yet, so I believe that there are mixed emotions. And we also have to take into account the fact that the last time that Iran was engaged in a total war with such heavy bombardment was in the... So many of the citizens in Iran today did not experience the bombardment that they experience these days. So there are obviously mixed emotions.
I think that's a really interesting point that you're making, Liora, because I think that people underestimate the shock of war. If you, as I do occasionally, go to Kyiv, they're 4 years into it, sort of they understand it. If you go to Tel Aviv, as I was recently, sort of the last few years, let alone, sort of all the previous ones, you get used to a certain rhythm of, okay, now there's an attack, so make sure that you're doing something about it. Maneli, do you sense that the shock of living under fire is affecting people?
I think so. And it's very interesting you talked about Iran-Iraq war, because I was in Iran at that time. I'm born with this revolution, basically. So I experienced this 8 year of war, even though I was a kid. The major difference between that time and this time, even for my generation, is that the Iran-Iraq war didn't come to Tehran until the last months. So when we were in Tehran, in big cities, we were quite far from the war was in the TV, basically, in south of Iran. And it came really in Tehran on a short period of time at the end. Today, the intensity of bombings inside Tehran, because they are tracking repression forces, is so heavy that basically people see everything happening from their window. But that being said, it's very different. And I would love to have your, some people from Lebanon also, because the way they're experiencing it inside Iran is very different from Lebanon. Lebanon, they are impacted. They need to leave their homes. They need to, and they can't get back actually to their, whereas in Iran it's more of an experience that they're doing by being at their homes, not being able to go out because of repression forces, and they are observing, and sometimes even they are collaborating with forces by taking photos, by taking pictures, sending out from repression forces and their movements, etc. So I think they are somehow part of the war by being actively waiting that moment. This mixture of a war and a regime change is experienced by lots of them. Now, not all for sure, but I think the circle who is experiencing it this way is much, much bigger than what we think.
Mm.
We should also add that we are in Ramadan and on the eve of the Nowruz, the Iranian New Year, which are both supposed to be periods of community, of restraint, of renewal, a completely different social atmosphere than what is going on right now. And instead, the public mode is one of emergency and oppression. And that, again, lands on society that began 2026 in a very brutal way domestically. So this is not just an external war story. It is a year that started with internal violence and tightening control. And the war adds another layer of emergency governance on top of it.
That sounds very, very difficult. So what is the attitude you perceive of the people in Iran, those of them that you can reach and however you can measure it, to the war? Are they against it?
This is a very difficult question to answer, and to be sure that the answer is correct because of lack of information. Internet is cut, so we are in touch with some people that we know and we can keep a connection with, but it's very, very difficult to measure the global state of the society, people's feeling. Even though with internet, it would be very difficult because only opinion measurement you would have is through following the contents globally on the internet and attitude and narratives on the internet, but we know that it's widely also manipulated, so it's very difficult to get it. But today more than ever, because we don't have any connection inside, only thing we can do is to consider that all these different state of mind exists, and try to consider them not I would say from just one side. Not saying that everyone is happy because the regime comes to an end. Not everyone is fearful. Not everyone. I think it's really a mixture of lots of things, and the only thing that can show up what the state of mind is would be when we are reaching this turning point with the regime, where the defections plus weakening of the repression forces and everything adds up, and it creates a space, hopefully, and then we can see the attitude of people. But for now, it's very early to say if they undergo more fear or hate. One thing also can change radically the picture, and it would be the shape of strikes. We saw it yesterday, since the strike went on, gas infrastructures, and this sense of nationalism that we can wake up suddenly in people, even though we are not in the context of a war where they are with their government, still can affect the path and the way they perceive this international coalition coming to help them in a way, because they come for nuclear and ballistic reasons, but still along the way we have some help. So everything depends, I think, in coming days, and we will see the attitude of people based on the shape of what's happening.
Liora, do you think that when I'm in Israel, I usually find that most people aren't antagonistic towards the Iranian people? They're antagonistic towards the regime. Do you think that's still holding now? Is that the general feeling you get?
that's exactly the general feeling we get, that there is a separation between the Islamic Republic, the regime, and the Iranian people. This relies on history and on a common culture with historical roots from the Bible. There is also a continuity of Jewish life in Iran. There are a lot of people who used to work in Iran back in the 1970s up until the late 1970s, who have nostalgic memories and of course a lot of good memories from Iran from those days. And there is also a community in Israel of Iranian descent, of Israeli Iranians or Iranian Israelis, defend them in a certain way. And many of them consider themselves to be bridges in the day after between the two nations. So there is a genuine differentiation between the regime and its ideology and the Iranian people. Of course, there are a lot of people in Israel who anticipate the day when Iranians will be liberated and will be able to choose their own destiny.
Having said that, though, I know that the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, has said that regime change in itself is not a war aim. So what are the war aims of Israel?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you, Leora.
Okay, just to make sure, just to make sure. I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that first it's to eliminate the threat that Iran poses. And when we are talking about the threat, it's not only the nuclear issues, but it is also the ballistic threat. And we see the amount of damage that these ballistic missile capabilities are doing. And it's not only an Israeli issue. We see that in the past 20 days, Iran has been shooting all over the place, all over the Gulf, and even beyond its borders. They said that they are going to target military and strategic bases in the region, but we see that their ballistic missiles arrive at hotel and at civil society, and not civil society, civil targets, and they target civilians and buildings, and they even celebrate it in the official organs of the regime when they manage to cause a lot of damage in Israel and beyond its borders. So it has been escalating in a way that I believe, again, that the major issue is to eliminate these threats when it comes to the Israeli point of view. And because the Islamic Republic's stance on Israel is not a single policy, it is a long-term posture with, I can say, three consistent elements. First, there is an ideological horizon in official rhetoric. Senior leaders repeatedly describe an end state in which Israel does not exist, often framed as opposition to the Zionist regime. And that language matters because it sets the condition and the conflict. So that language matters because it sets the conflict as existential rather than negotiable. And second, there is an operational architecture. Iran projects power through armed partners and regional fronts, with Hezbollah as the most consequential example. And its proxy network, what Iran is calling forward defense, isn't incidental. It's how Iran turns ideology into leverage without always fighting directly. And third, there is a track record of resisting compromise and normalization. We can see that throughout the years, the Islamic Republic has consistently positioned itself against compromise frameworks and normalization tracks. It rejected the direction of major peace and normalization initiatives from earlier backthroughs like the Camp David and later the process like Oslo, to the more recent normalization of the Abraham Accords, which Tehran condemned fiercely. So put together, this is why the conflict is structurally hard to de-escalate, and this is why Israel considers Iran to be such a great threat.
Interesting. Is that the same perception inside Iran, do you think, Maneli?
Yeah, I think the Iranian people, they know precisely that this war is not at first for regime change, and they know that bombings cannot change a regime. I think they are mature enough to recognize it. They also perceive, the nuclear issue. 15 years ago, when I was going to Iran, the nuclear program was a pride. They were very proud of such an achievement, having a word to say in the international community, and the self-determination aspects of the nuclear issue. Then we went through all those years of tension with the international community, the inability of the regime to negotiate, the impact of sanctions, and really we saw a major shift among Iranians who would even in their posture of a very nationalistic way of seeing the situation, they would recognize that the nuclear issue became our main threat and problem, and maybe we don't need it. Maybe we don't need to be this power, and we would have more peace, and then with peace and with economic prosperity we would be stronger even than by having the bomb. So this took time. This maturity among the society, generally speaking, took a decade actually. But today, yeah, they recognize that the nuclear threat has begun. They are also very, I would say, tired of seeing, even for the part of the society who still has sympathy for the regime, they are tired of this rhetoric of regional power, which is partly linked to the ballistic missile, to proxies, as you said, and to see that it's not effective, and it's not, basically their money is going to all those programs, all those proxies, and basically they are even not answering to the promise they were making. And this from the perspective of those who have an appetite and who even have the ideology of the regime. They are thinking, where are those millions that you injected to Hamas? Where are those millions that you injected to Hezbollah and to Houthis and to everyone? So it's seen as a failure. Now we see the part of this failure which gives to the regime the state of non-legitimacy. We see it among all the mass of people who are opposed to this regime. We begin hearing it among those who are still sympathizer of the regime. But the perception of the war, yeah, they recognize that the first two parts are really true. Still, there is a hope. There is a hope, and this is the important part, that along the way, to eliminate this threat for the region and for Israel and for Europeans even, we can find this space for us to get out and to change, to bring regime change. And this is the part that makes me afraid, because by saying that, it means that if, let's say today, where we are in the war, if today Trump decides to cut it and to move back, then Iranians are left with a failed state, not weakened enough. The repression forces are not weakened enough to let them, come out and to empower them, but still a failed state, which cannot be out of sanctions today as it is, because the nuclear issue is not, yet solved. The ballistic issue, we can consider it as partly addressed, but still they have room to redevelop. So we would leave the same regime, a little bit weaker, but not being able to remove sanctions, nothing. So a failed state, or what we call a zombie state, what we experienced in 1990s in Iraq, and it gave conditions, the horrible humanitarian conditions and political conditions, to be obliged to go back in 2003. And this is what Iranians fear the most, to be left as it is with them. So that being said, the expectation of regime change from this war is also there, even though they recognize that it's not by bombings. But still, it needs to go as far as it can to give room and to empower people to move forward.
That's very, very interesting, because what we haven't mentioned is also the Gulf states, and who are being severely impacted. And of course, everything to do with the Straits of Hormuz. And a bit interestingly, I was reading yesterday, I think, that many in the Gulf states feel the same way, that the worst possible thing that would happen now is just to walk away from it, because you will have a wounded Iran, but not changed Iran, and the situation would become even more radical, potentially, as a result of that. What is the historic reason, if I may ask Maneli, Liora, for the animosity between the Gulf states and Iran?
This is a multi. Liora may explain it better than me on the historical side. I think historically it has some explanations, but also in, the Iranians are, the Iranian regime, but even Iranian culture, I would say, has a hegemonic way of seeing its role in the Middle East, willing to be recognized as the power of the Middle East. And I think, and again, I prefer Liora to talk about it, but as far as I perceive it, even before the revolution, the 79 revolution, the aim of Iranians were to be the power of the region. And then you have all those states who individually, if we take them individually, are not that powerful, don't have any massive population, don't have an army. They are very equipped, but they don't have men to run equipments, but still are in a sort of rivalry toward Iranians on the economic side of it. And so this competition has always been there between Iran and between Gulf states, them having the protection of the US officially. We see that it lacks to deliver today, but they never wanted Iranian to be part of this bigger picture. And this is where I always recognize something interesting to shape with Israel. Iranian people and Israeli people can shape this axis. I always say Abraham Accords is a political accords. It's not between people. Whereas implicitly between Iranian people and Israeli people, there is this historical and cultural proximity, which can give this access of prosperity over years. And this makes also Gulf states fearful about any change.
Interesting. Liora?
Well, first, there are a lot of booms right now, but
Yeah, I heard one or two there in
sirens,
the background.
it's like my faces are because I'm like wondering what's going on outside. So it's scary. Okay, to your to your question. I don't know how much time do you have, because we can talk on each and every. Okay, short. Okay, short while, because I believe that each and every country in the Gulf, we can have a different panel. For example, Iran, Iraq, or Iran and Saudi Arabia, or Iran and any other, or the UAE or Kuwait. So it's complicated. But I would say, I would add that there are also the issue of nationality. We are talking about Arab countries and Arab nationalism versus Iranian or Persian nationalism, and everything that is connected with the history of that rift. And there is also the issue of religion. We are talking about Sunnah versus Shiites. So it's also issue. And of course, the political issues throughout the years. So, and we are also talking about size. If we look at the map, we can see that Iran is one of the largest countries in the region. And of course, it strives to be hegemonic sense if you consider its size. And of course, we are talking about more than 90 million people. So in comparison, and of course, historically, it has a cultural and historical breadth and continuity in more or less the same borders. So it gives Iranians and Iran itself a long historical entanglement and relations with all the people that surrounds it in the region.
There's so much that we can carry on talking about, but unfortunately, we're going to have to start looking towards the end. But I really have two questions. One of them to you, Liora. How does this end?
Wow.
This was unexpected.
Well, there is what I hope and what it seems like is going to happen. And it depends on certain things. We hear a lot of evaluations, because what is going on right now is this escalation or conflict going towards an energy crisis, and it affects globally, many other countries. So there are a lot of estimations that once petrol will rise up in prices, then somehow the US will put the brakes and stop the war. And it depends. It depends how this escalation ends, whether it's going to be another round in a cycle of rounds. We don't know, because we thought that in June 2025, it will be the only round directly between Israel and in Iran. And we see now that it didn't happen. We know that a lot of the issues are still on the table. That means that we still don't know what will happen with the nuclear issue, with the enriched uranium that is somewhere around. We don't know. We don't know what will happen with the regime itself. I mean, in recent days, only yesterday, we see that with the eliminations of, first it started with Khamenei, then it is Larijani. So we have to see how the system responds to that, how the Iranian people respond to what is going on. We don't know if the neighbors will join in or not, if there will be enough pressure from the EU. I don't know, from domestic politics in the US, there are also problems there. It depends on so many variables. Then what I feel is that we will have to meet again and discuss it. And then I'll be able to explain everything and how it happened.
That is absolutely for sure. But Maneli, when you introduced yourself, you also pointed out, and this is my second question, the opposition was very disorganized. Do you feel that it's more organized now? Can you put together an option?
Well, this is this requires a whole another program. But to make it short, the problems we had and in some extent we still have in the opposition is what the regime perfectly succeed to achieve, which is the atomization and fragmentation of the opposition over years. And my assessment today is that the solution will come out of a systemic change and not just an opposition action from one side of the story. Because, as you know, Iran society is so complex. It can't be shortened or summarized in a trend or in something. Even though someone seems to have the majority, still the minority can be part of a destabilization, which is not acceptable in a change process. So unless we gather everyone together, we gather all different ethnics, all different political affiliations, all different appetites for the free Iran or future Iran, none of them alone will succeed. So that's a fact, and I think it's recognized by all of the major stakeholders in there. And the biggest question mark is about inside. I personally believe that the most important part of the solution is inside Iran. But under the regime, it can't be visible, it can't be vocal. And so we need to reach this moment of truth, this moment where everything is aligned, all planets are aligned, and then suddenly, and this is what we call in systemic thinking, we call it emergence, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of non-answer, much question and non-answer, suddenly a part of the system comes out that you couldn't perceive it before. So this is not a hope. I think this is part of what we often in society systems. Now, it may take time. It may not come out suddenly and where we were expecting it. I personally believe that in moments of crisis, the opposition and usually Iranians prove to be suddenly much more mature than they are in times of peace. And so I really believe that this momentum, we are under a shock. I talk a lot with generals and amirals and military people here who tell me you are naive to think that it will last 2 weeks. A war by definition is long because it needs to achieve something. It may sometimes be calmer and then go up again, or be a quiet war. But still, unless we achieve the objectives, the war will go on. It can be a cold war again, but let's take it the Hormuz Strait. Hormuz Strait can't be solved militarily. and it can't be solved unless the regime is no more there. The same with the uranium. The enriched uranium can't be taken off by military actions. We know it today. If not, I mean, they would shorten it, take it off, and that's, I mean, a done deal for the US. But they can't. So the political change still is ongoing, and is ongoing in the context of war with not just Israel and the US, global one, going on with the world. Iran is more isolated than ever. Gulf states are part of it. Even Europe is now part of it, defensively, but still they're part of it. So in that context, I think it will push the opposition, coming back to the opposition, it will push the opposition from within, outside, to all converge little by little towards something. To put it more clearly, even though a movement and a change needs an incarnation, a name, a face, but this name and this face, talking about Pahlavi, can't secure the whole country if it doesn't get involved all ethnic groups, and it can't, organize the day after it if it doesn't evolve, people from more Republican affiliation, etc., and inside. So they will converge ultimately with the help of some people like us, but yeah, I believe they will.
Well, I think that's a very optimistic way to end this absolutely fascinating conversation, which I think we've just started as far as I'm concerned. But unfortunately, that's a wrap on this episode of Women Leaders. Thank you so much to our guests, Maneli Mirkhan and Liora Hendelman-Baavur. Keep listening to our conversations and support us with a subscription on your podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, add to the conversation with your comments. In addition, help support our podcast and spread the happy word of this episode to friends, colleagues, enemies, family, and anyone you think would like it. We're on all media, so reach out on Instagram as @women_leaders_podcast and on ELN Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. All information and links mentioned in the episode can be found in the notes. I'm Ilana Beit-El, together with my friend and producer Florence Ferrando, and we'll be back very soon with another great conversation.